and welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And I am your host, Jackson Keller.
And we promised we're going to have a guest this episode, and by gone, I'm 70 years old now and brought a guest with me.
It's Shazam that's imprinting itself in your speech with golly gee willikers, holy moly.
Wait, maybe that's the answer though. Maybe like when you say Shazam as a 20-year-old, it turns you into like an 80-year-old.
I want to see that movie. We have the legendary, the lovely Hayli with us today, mentioned many times for her smarter takes on movies than me, and now here she is because she's got a bone to pick with the world about the latest Stephen King film, Pet Sematary. Say hi to everyone, Hayli.
Hi, I'm Hayli.
Is there anything you'd like to tell the world about yourself before we get involved here?
I do indeed have a bone to pick.
All right. You
Hell yeah.
First.
We're here. We're scrapping for a fight at Beating a Dead Horse today.
And we are definitely scrapping for a fight here, at least one in between us. So let's talk about Pet Sematary, and I'm gonna go last.
Hayli, you're our guest, so why don't you go first?
Great. So this movie is, for me, an extra special treat because I used to be a really big fan of the 1989 film, and I usually watch that every year around like Halloween, sort of end of fall, beginning of winter. I really like to get scared. I used to work at a haunted house, and I'm really into horror, so that's always been a nice movie for me. I think that being really into and familiar with that original movie, and also having read the novel once or twice when I was a younger person.
Before she said the Shazam word, we should clarify that.
In high school, I actually... What?
But before she said the Shazam word, because now she is, much like all of us, 70, she at one point said Shazam. Never mind. I was trying to make a joke, and it just didn't work, all right?
Did she say Shazam? I don't remember her saying Shazam.
She didn't. I was just trying to be fun. I was playing in the space of, like, I said Shazam earlier. She said she was a younger person. Like, it sounded like she was way older than she is.
To clarify, I'm 65,
Right, that's what I'm getting at here, all right? There was this whole thing, this whole train of thought in my head that this is going to be a great goof, and it's going to be funny, and it's going to be great, and instead it was this.
Oh.
Talk about your goddamn movie.
I will not defend the movie entirely. I think there were a lot of flaws. I would still give it maybe a 6 out of 10. But for me, that's a high rating because I happen to have a higher standards for horror movies, or perhaps lower standards. It's hard to say, but I will just say that I think that this movie was a treat for people who had seen it before, and it might have other audiences. But I think that it had a nice dialogue with the original.
Anything else you'd like to add before I give my take?
I made Jackson watch the original before he watched the 2019 version because I wanted him to see what I saw in the movie and not hate it like the rest of the internet did.
More specifically, she wanted to stack the deck against Sean here.
Yes, I did. Can you
Welcome
tell?
to a guest episode of Beating a Dead Horse, where it is 2 against 1.
Now, to be fair, last time that was a coincidence. Here we're codifying it into law.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sure. Yeah. So, very recently, a couple nights ago, me and Hayli were just hanging out, and she suggested that we watch the original Pet Sematary. This is after she expressed a desire to come on and talk about it. And at first I was a little confused, a little dubious about this decision, because I'm not familiar with the source material. I've never read the original novel. I didn't watch the original film, the 1989 version. I'm not a big horror guy, generally speaking. So I was a little dubious. I'm like, well, shouldn't I go into the new one kind of free of spoilers? This isn't like it, where like I had read at least a decent chunk of the book. And so, like, what are you doing, Hayli? Like, why are you making me do this? So, but we watched it, and, I was surprised by how much I ended up enjoying it. I think for my evaluation of the new version, it's important for to have the context of the original, because the original is a movie that I would call almost good. The script is sound, the story is not what I was expecting, because, like, you know, Pet Sematary is a pretty, like, famous story. Like, it's Sean, you used the word ubiquitous in our pre-discussion, and I'd say that's pretty apt for a lot of these Stephen King stories, like It and Carrie and Misery and a lot of others, and certainly this one's no exception. But, like, I expected it to be a lot schlockier. Like, when you hear the title Pet Sematary and just knowing what kind of writer Stephen King is, and maybe I wasn't giving him enough credit. Like, he does tend to, like, at least try to have more, like, complex characters and themes, even though he writes kind of like in the, like, getting in the dirt, like, pulp kind of schlock. But so when I hear the title Pet Sematary, I expect pretty much Night of the Living Dead with a bunch of dogs and cats, and that's silly and funny and ridiculous.
I would watch that.
I would watch that too. But it's not that, and I was surprised that it wasn't that. And like, I overall, like, as far as the story, I was very much into the original movie. The effects were great. Like, there's a lot of great practical gore, a lot of great horrific imagery in the 1989 version. Really, it has, in my estimation, just one fatal flaw, and that's that the acting is horrendous. Like, Birdemic tier bad. Every single line of dialogue that came out of Judd's mouth was fucking unreal, and the main character, he looked like a young Ben Affleck, but without any sort of charisma at all. He just gave everything at a flat board monotone.
That's saying something, because Ben Affleck doesn't have charisma anyway.
No. Sub Ben Affleck. So like, yeah, it's a movie that I would call almost good. It's got all the pieces. It's but overall, I'd say, like, if I had to give it a rating, I'm a bigger fan of the 5-star scale myself. I'd give it like a 3-star, like my minimum for worth watching. So, you know, we watched this. I'm surprised. I'm like, wow, Hayli, I'm glad you made me watch this. I no longer question your judgment. And then we went to go see the new one, and I questioned her judgment a little bit again, because the remake, without going too much into the spoilers, at first it seems very much like the remake is just kind of, if not shot for shot, following all the same beats of the original. But I do agree with her assessment that watching the original really was an enriching experience for me. It made the merits of the new one a lot clearer to me. There are a lot of, like, Hayli, the word that you've been using is treats, and I think that's a good word for it. Like, little moments and misdirections from people familiar with the source material in one way or the other.
Hang on, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second and just ask, didn't we have this exact same conversation with True Grit as well?
I think we did. Oh. Except that time, neither of us had seen anything but the new ones.
That's true. That's true. I remember Maddie mentioning, like, the same thing. Like, there's a lot of nuances to the original and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds really interesting. And we're gonna be talking about that after this too. So, I guess guests just come at us with remakes, and we'll talk about how we don't understand the nuances of the original.
But I understand it this time because Hayli had a plan. So, oh man. Overall, I'd say that the new movie, not great, not amazing, and I think story-wise, like, the changes they made in terms of theme and cohesion are not as strong as in the original, particularly the ending. But overall, definitely worth watching. I liked a lot of the mood. I'm very much into the Stephen King, like, small town, rural Americana aesthetic, and when the woods were getting all foggy. I'm a big fan of Alan Wake, which is also Stephen King inspired, and it was giving me a lot of those vibes. So yeah, I liked it quite a bit. I thought it was much better than It, which I didn't even hate as much as these two did. Yeah, I overall, I would recommend seeing it. Probably, I liked it. I liked the film. Solid 3 stars, both the original and the new one. Although, if you gun to my head, I'd say probably if you're only gonna watch one, watch the original, just because the practical effects are nice. The weirdness makes it kind of charming and memorable. And like I said, thematically, the story's a little bit more cohesive in that one.
And this is where I come in. And I'm going to begin by saying I am so sorry, Hayli. Because I went into this movie with an open mind. It's one of those things where when I hear a lot of people say, like, oh, it was really bad, but then there's that small minority of people being like, no, I really liked it. I thought it was good. I'm like, all right, cool. This could be another cult movie, like one of those like cult movies that get big for a certain group of people or something like that. And I'm like, that's the shit that I live for. I love finding stuff like that.
I had to defend Spider-Man 3 again today, just while we're on that track.
So yeah, like stuff like that, like people who like swear by certain movies that are generally not liked. So I went into this, I'm like, all right, cool. I'm ready for another one of these. I'm ready to like sing the praises of this movie, like the hidden values of it. My favorite part of the movie was the punk song of Pet Sematary that they played over the end credits. That is the most damning thing I can say about it, and that is something that I've told a number of people, and they're like, oh, did you like it? Because that is really a nice synopsis of my feelings of it. I think talking to these guys in the pre-discussion, this is not a movie for me. I am not the audience in any way, shape, or form. So take my review with a grain of salt. But I really did not like it. I have written in my notes that it was an exercise in misery, and it was just a slog for me to get through. Like, it was an hour and 40 minutes, and it felt like 3. It was, oh man, it felt predictable. It never really coalesced any themes that were particularly engaging. It never became like an interesting character study because I never really felt like there were any great characters to it. There was just a lot of things that just never came together in any way that I thought was interesting. My biggest point of comparison, and something that like I thought about a lot while I was watching it, is Hereditary. I'm gonna do my damnedest not to spoil anything about Hereditary. But like at this point, you probably know what I'm referring to if you're in the cultural zeitgeist pretty much at all with Hereditary. But where Hereditary, I feel kind of, and I'm going to cite Hayli, who referenced that Hereditary kind of stole a lot of ideas from the original Pet Sematary novel. I will definitely say that it did, but it kind of built it into something new and interesting. This movie kind of took those ideas and themes, squashed them, threw them away, and just kind of made a tropey horror movie that never really elevated above boring for me. So that was scathing, and I'm sorry. Once again, I feel really bad because like I'm really excited to have a guest on, and I really wanted to like this movie, but I couldn't. I tried so hard. I really did.
Don't feel bad. Hayli was looking for a scrap. She admitted it to me.
I always am looking for a scrap.
And also, like, you left out the most scathing part of your critique was that you came in with a hurricane heist comparison.
Yeah.
Which, like, ooh, man, I just can't get behind that at all. Like, I'm pretty sure that I would not have enjoyed the movie as much if I had not seen the original. But even so, like, I think I can point to a couple merits it has independently. Like, Hurricane Heist was one of the worst movies I've ever seen. So wow, I was real surprised when you said that.
There are like, keep in mind, like, I'm a big cinematography dork, and like I like impressive shots, and I mean, I'm a staunch defender of Bad Times at the El Royale, which most people are like, you could cut out half of that movie and it'd be much better. And I'm like, no, fuck you. That movie's perfect. That like the 2.5 runtime it is. I love it.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
Well, see, thank you. And now I feel really bad because I just, bash this movie that you like, but I'm sitting here like Bad Times is great. And you're like, oh, yeah, that it is. So, I don't know.
I think we all think Bad Times is great here, don't we? Like, I wasn't as big a fan as you were, but I thought it was still a really good movie.
No, but like I know a lot of people, especially like film critics and whatnot, it was a pretty polarizing movie.
Yes, that's fair.
So like it's still one of those things too where you do have to also just have the patience to sit through like multiple long shots, which can be trying for the quick cuts of today's cinema. And that's, once again, makes me sound like I'm some old codger. I like today's cinema a lot, so I just like long shots a lot too.
Sean thumbing his nose at the plebes with their Marvel movies and their quick cuts.
Look at you watching Aquaman. I was studying the blade. So yeah, that's my scathing takedown of Pet Sematary because I really did not like it. I was bored. Hurricane Heist was an apt comparison because I left like I was antsy and just done with it about halfway through. And I have a lot to talk about, but I think I'm gonna let them talk about it first because they have more interesting things to say. That's not just tearing it apart. I don't know why I sang this.
Well, I think that's our cue to start going into spoilers. Do we want to do our mid-episode commercial break?
Yeah. And by commercial break, we mean just tune in next Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at twitch.tv/helpus_skippy. We're going to be talking about Danganronpa 2, Goodbye Despair live. Which means if you got questions, we got answers. We'll talk about our feelings, all that good stuff. Danganronpa is a great game coming out for that. If you can't make it, don't worry. We have a full episode going live on Thursday of the recording, so you can listen to it there.
Hayli, don't listen to this one. I'm going to make you play Danganronpa 1, and I'm probably going to spoil a shit ton of that game, so don't tune in.
Okay.
Is there anything you want to talk about before we move on, Hayli? Because, like, some people dip out when we get into spoilers. Like, is there anything you want to promote?
Yeah, plug that shit, whatever that shit is.
All right. I mean, do you want to talk about your Twitter or anything? I mean, you don't have to. Twitter's a fucking hellscape. And
yeah, that's how I feel about social media and the internet mostly.
Okay, cool. Then you're good?
I'm good.
All right. Hayli's cool. That's what we're promoting right now.
Hayli is cool. She's the coolest.
No.
I feel like there's some bias going on here. Let's talk spoilers.
Well, Hayli, do you want to start us off with some of those connections? You are our humble guest here, and I feel like I'm going to play more the role of mediator of this debate between you two here than anything. So,
and also resident Pet Sematary expert, so
I am the expert on all pet cemeteries. I myself have once maintained a pet cemetery. So the book is something I haven't read in a long time. It won a World Fantasy Award. It was really well received. It's had like re-editions printed of it. It's, something a lot of people have read. But I honestly don't remember a ton from it. I do know that it was a little bit more gory and that the neighbor who appears in the original, who doesn't appear in the 2019 remake, plays a much larger role in it and brings in the theme of suicidality to the movie. So there are a lot of differences between the book and the original movie, and it was a little bit more gruesome. So I'm just gonna kind of talk about what the connections are between the 1989 film and the 2019 film, and the connections for the first maybe half of the movie, or before the child dies, right, in the horrific truck accident. It's pretty much the same film. It does a lot of things differently with the way certain shots are. Cinematography is a little bit different. The acting's better, as Jackson said. I actually think the cinematography kind of suffers in this one a little bit. But then actually when the child dies is when it actually flips, and the expectations for somebody who has seen the original are sort of turned on their head and subverted. And I think it's really fascinating that they do it in this way. in the book and in the original movie, it's Gage who dies. And you get a lot of character setup in both the original and the book, and the remake for Gage. And I think that I could notice while we were watching the movie, Jackson sort of, suffering a little bit, knowing that we're getting to know this kid and he's doing these cute things, and Jackson, who we all know doesn't like kids that much. I can feel him next to me, kind of, oh, So I think that they do that really well. And in the book, actually, there's a little detail that when Gage is hit by the car, he's hit so hard that his head comes off from his body, and they have to sew it back on. And in the original movie, there's actually a terrible fight. So it's sort of hinted at in the new movie that there is some sort of issue between Lewis and Rachel's parents. They don't get along, but that's a much bigger thing in the original movie. They do the transition between Gage's death and the funeral and everything that happens. That's much more emotionally charged than the 1989 film. They show a snapshot series of photos, and there's an actual fight where you see Gage's body a little bit as the casket falls from the pedestal.
That shit was hard to watch. The fight that followed, yeah, that was something that I agree was really missing from the new one in comparison.
It sounds way better.
The acting was not great. That's why they made it again.
I'm all right with bad acting if you give me good content.
I recommend seeing the original for sure. What it does well, again, is subverting it being a treat for the person who has already seen it before. And that's, what they do differently here is Ellie's the one who dies. And Jackson kind of was hinting at it already, that they really lead you to believe that for the people who have even seen the original movie, that Gage is still going to be the one who dies, and that maybe Ellie's a fake out. But what ends up happening is that, they actually cut the sound completely for that scene. And that's something, Jackson, did you want to say something about how you thought maybe this should be a silent film?
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're talking about the original. Yeah. So in the original, like that moment where Gage is running to the street and like they're all laughing and having a good time, and the parents are like hanging out with Judd, sipping beers with Judd, cracking open a cold one with Judd. And Gage runs to the street and gets demolished by the semi truck. It's a really it's a really good moment until the dad opens his mouth and screams to the sky, "No!" It's really bad.
I just need to interject really quick. Are either of you familiar with the song "Stuart" by the Dead Milkmen?
I know literally nothing about music.
Okay. There's a line in it where it just straight up, "Pow, he was decapitated. They found his head over by the snow cone machine."
Oh, you memed about this all the time when we were living together.
Yeah, and I cannot not every time he goes like, "Oh yeah, he was decapitated," I keep enjoying to go, "Pow, he was decapitated."
But yeah, so like my assessment of the original is that I've heard God, I can't remember who said this. It was about the Transformers movies. I want to say it was Red Letter Media. I'm not sure, though. Someone has said that the Transformers movies become good movies if you watch them as a silent film with no dialogue, because all you have is, like, Michael Bay's, like, curious fixations in cinematography. And I think this is absolutely true of the original Pet Sematary, because the acting... I mean, I'll stick up for like the story and a lot of the effects and a lot of the original Pet Sematary, but I cannot stress enough how fucking terrible the acting is. It is a horror movie from the 80s, but even by those standards, I think it's like, I'm not kidding when I'm making Birdemic comparisons here.
So there's an extended scene in a bar where they're hanging out with their family and stuff.
Kind of.
Oh God.
But yeah, so no, that was the moment from the original, which is sad because Haley, like you said, the follow-up scenes, like with the fight at the funeral, and like it's not just that you see Gage's body, it's that they knock over the casket and like you see it open, like as it hits the ground, you just see his like little hands just like jostle and his body like it gets a real disturbing image. It's a real heartbreaking image. But the actual death scene, just fucking ridiculous. He screams no to the sky like he's Solid Snake's support team, and he's just got a game over. It's great.
And the best actors in the original are the child actors.
That says a lot, yeah.
And the CGI cat.
The cat was clearly a puppet.
Oh, was it? Oh, it was definitely Uncanny Valley.
What the hell were we talking about?
The silent film.
Be Better as a silent film. Continue, Haley.
And I think it just goes from there. The film just becomes a different film after that. A lot of the themes are surrounding control and fear regarding death and religion and mental illness are still kind of there, but they're not as strong, I don't think, in the remake. But that's where I think it shines in a different way. And again, I'm going to stress this. I think it's a real treat for people who have seen the original, and I think it takes a lot of skill to know what a certain audience is going to expect and to know exactly how to play off of that. And I think they did a really good job there.
So here's where I'm going to bounce in and drop two little bits of knowledge. One is subjective, one is objective. And I'm going to start with the objective because I think that you guys have brought up some really great points about how the movie plays with expectations of those who have seen it, the previous ones, and are familiar with the source material and everything like that. Like that tells a really interesting story, and like even in our pre-discussion, I'm really excited to get further into this because there's a lot to talk about with that stuff. However, I knew Ellie was going to die before I went into the movie because the advertising gave it away.
Oh.
And that's why I leave watching trailers to you nowadays.
Yes.
It's funny how often that's a reaction, and that like I basically don't watch trailers anymore, like unless it's a big meme or like for a big important movie. Like I did watch the like new Star Wars trailer, but otherwise like the only trailers that I see are what's in the theater. And since we live in like bumblefuck nowhere, we only get like 2 trailers before every movie. So I end up seeing the same trailers all the time. Like they're always going to play the Avengers Endgame trailer like at least once, no matter what the movie is. So like I'm pretty out of the loop as far as the advertising, and it sounds like I'm grateful for that.
See, I feel like movie trailers, I do watch more movie trailers than you, but like I kind of get hit and miss with them. Because like if it's something I want to watch, like I'll watch the initial teaser trailer and then I won't watch anything after that because like I just want like the basic information on it. I did not ever intend to watch this movie, so like I caught the trailer just on TV. So like it wasn't even something that I even necessarily sought out to watch. I just in the background heard it on TV and I'm like, we can't bring her back to life, and so. Like I knew it was coming, which means that anyone else who saw this on TV totally undermines this incredible setup that they do for people who are familiar with the material.
That's highly unfortunate.
Yeah.
I still think the film, either film and the book, have a lot of really interesting themes around death, which is why I started talking to Jackson about it in the first place. Because it does a lot of things that I think are unique, that are clearer in the original movie, in the 1989 film, than they are in the 2019 film, but are still relatively absent in a lot of horror movies, at least, if not still some dramas and other genres that I think could be interesting to talk about.
So one of those things, I guess, Shauna, I know you had another point, but one thing I wanted to address as far as some of these changes, like just from my personal experience, is that Since obviously I didn't see any of the trailers for this movie. I didn't even know it was out until Hayli told me that there were like a bunch of people who are fans of horror movies saying it was shitty, and she had some hot takes about it. So I didn't know a thing about it. And so it was genuinely surprising to me when Ellie died, and this is a change that I think is good. It made a lot more sense, like, thematically to me, just because in the original I thought it was kind of weird, just because, like, obviously my dislike of children has been well established on this podcast at this point. So, like, Gage in the original just seemed like such a periphery thing. Like, he's like Maggie from The Simpsons. Like, they're like, yeah, you have a baby in there because families have babies. They're basically props. So it was genuinely surprising to me when Gage died in the original, just because, like, Ellie got so much more focus. I remember thinking, like, after sort of the initial shock and, like, those really, like, heart-wrenching scenes when we get to the, like, horror movie parts where baby Gage comes back and starts, going on his, like, rampage, like, I remember thinking to myself that in the original it's kind of weird that Ellie is basically written out of the movie at that point, and because so much focus is given to her as a character early on. So I think it makes a lot more sense, especially like Hayli, when we were talking about this when we left the theater, that so much of the movie is about, like, them trying to explain death to Ellie and get her to understand it and how she does or does not. I think that the fact that we have a character who is more, like, developed, like, cognitively is interesting, and that, like, she actually interacts with her dad before going on her like, murderous rampage. And those are the moments for me the movie was really shining. I think that like, one of my favorite scenes, one of the most, like, skin crawling scenes for me, was when, like, Ellie was, like, realizing, like, hey, I got taken the fuck out by this truck. Like, Dad, did you do some terrible shit to me? And he's like, don't worry about it. And she's like, well, stay with me tonight. And he just, like, crawls into bed with this corpse girl and just has to, like, lay next to her for a little bit. Like, I was getting, like,
really quick was really hoping that she wouldn't blink that entire time. Like, that was what I was really watching for. I'm like, if she doesn't blink, like, that would just be, like, just some next level unnerving shit. Because, like, just, like, keeping her eyes open. Like, they're going to sleep and just, like, acknowledging, like, you gotta close your eyes to do that. But, like, it creates this idea of, like, you're watching for her to blink and then she just doesn't. Like, that's what I was really hoping for. So that's just a little personal disappointment. No real bearing on the movie. I'm like, this would be fucking sick if they just made her not blink. But she did. I checked.
I had a weird thing about the eyes, too. I'll just say, Sean, I was disappointed that they didn't have the detail that when someone's embalmed or they're buried and not cremated, you have to put a large amount of artificial material behind the eyes so that if there's an open casket, they don't sink in. So usually there's a lot of weird things going on there. So she could have looked a lot more disturbing than she did.
I was really hoping they would too, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't know that fact about it, but, like, I was thinking, like, there's a lot of stuff that goes into embalming and whatnot. Like, she has to smell like formaldehyde and stuff. Like, I want to dive more into that. Like, that sounds fascinating. But
to the movie's credit, like, another scene that I really liked is when when Lewis is brushing her hair in the bathtub, and, like, the hairbrush keeps getting caught on, like, the staples in her head, and, like, I just felt my stomach fucking twist during that part. Sick, nasty, thought it was great, creepy little atmosphere moments.
See, I think part of the reason that scene didn't necessarily land for me as much as well is because when she was brushing Church's hair, she mentioned that, like, the brush got stuck and whatnot. And so, like, I was, when it did it to her, I was expecting the payoff to be that, like, a chunk of her scalp comes off with it or something like that. And, like, that was another thing where I'm like, this would be really fucking sick right here. Because, like, they kind of set that up at church where, like, it was stuck. So I'm like, okay, she's going to pull off the thing. But then he scratches her instead so she doesn't get to. Like, that felt like the payoff to that would be him doing the same thing and then pulling off a chunk of her hair. Whereas in this case, it kind of felt like a setup to something that doesn't quite pay off in the right way. Because like the church thing definitely felt like it was the setup to something. But then like Church doesn't have the staples in him anywhere. So like that payoff doesn't line up quite right. So I think like that might also be like just a problem I have with this movie is like I was really attuned to like setup and payoffs and stuff. And so like a lot of times it felt like they were setting things up that never really got paid off in the correct way.
That feels like a decent segue for you two to kind of get back into it. I just wanted to mention those scenes with Ellie because I really liked them. I have more to say about some of the changes they made, but I think that you two got to go at it a little bit first. I'm stoking the fires here. I want some bloodshed.
I mean, well, okay. Let me bounce off what I said earlier. Where, like, part of my thing is just subjective, and that is that this movie, as a standalone movie, is not good. I mentioned in the pre-discussion that it's really tropey, and like everything that they did, I basically was calling minutes in advance. The setup and payoffs are pretty clear, and like when they do pay off, like as I mentioned, there's a couple payoffs that don't really work out in the way that I was hoping they would, which I felt would have amplified it. Because like I think there are two ways that you can really kind of work with this, and the options are to make it kind of a more lingering, disturbing horror, which is what, Jackson was talking about with his scenes where, he's brushing her head and you get the staples in the back of her head, and then when they're laying in bed together, and I'm just going to rhyme head and bed for like the next 3 minutes, apparently. But when they're laying together like that, it's genuinely unnerving and not necessarily scary, but more existential horror to it. And I feel like there's a lot of underlying existential horror that kind of is at odds with the more conventional horror tropes. I don't want to get into jump scares yet. We're going to talk about jump scares. But I want to just kind of brush up against, like, if you've got a more jump scary movie, it's more looking on the ideas of gore and quick pops. Whereas I think this movie did better when it was taking more of the hereditary slow burn, making you feel uncomfortable. Because Jackson's right, and like those scenes are uncomfortable to look at, but they feel really undermined by a lot of the other stuff that the movie did.
And you're not traditionally a fan of horror movies.
That's a tricky question as well, actually. I'm finding myself enjoying more and more horror movies. I'm kind of working my way into the genre. I've grown up tangentially related to horror movies. Like, I never sought out the Saw movies and stuff, but I mentioned The Mist before, and like that's undeniably a horror movie, and I grew up with that. So
So I'm one of those people who seeks out every horror movie there is, and if it's rated at 5 out of 10 or higher, I will go watch it. Nothing scares me anymore. I, again, used to work at a haunted house. I write horror, actually, a little bit.
Okay.
I read horror novels. And I will say that most of the time you're right. There is a dichotomy between, that sort of disturbing, gore or traditional sort of jump scare horror, or something's more existential, more psychological. And I think that the original film, the 1989, did tend a little bit more towards psychological with horror elements and gore elements, and whereas this newer 2019 remake is kind of reversed. So it tries to do a little bit less with the psychological aspects, a little bit less thematically, and tries to do a little bit more with the imagery and the jump scares. But I don't think they need to be separate. And in fact, I think that so many movies, so many horror movies now, try to be one or the other, that I was refreshed by the fact that I felt that I was being stimulated in multiple ways that scare me. And as somebody who thinks about a lot of the times when I'm writing, what does scare somebody? What do people find terrifying? there are different kinds of things, like you're saying, that slow build up, that the jump scare is one of the only things that scares me anymore. I am a bit desensitized to gore in some ways, but I think having the brain squirt blood is a little extra.
No, I like that, actually.
I think that I think it did pretty well with the balance. I do think it lost a lot that the original film had going for it, but compared to most modern horror, I would say that this is, much better. And in fact, I think that Hereditary totally bombed the end of itself with how many tropes it decided to pack into the last few minutes.
I have a whole nother discussion about that. We're not getting into that one. We're staying away from that one. That's another 3-hour conversation.
No, let me. I want to segue. I want to preface to let the audience know how much of a mad lad Hayli is, because I distinctly remember that one time we were walking home one evening, and Hayli lives beyond a cemetery. The quickest way home from like town square, like Main Street, is through the cemetery.
And if that is not the most Haley thing y'all have ever heard in the time that we have spent together, I don't know what to tell you.
So Hayli and I, it's a nice cemetery, like especially during the day. Like we've gone walking around there before. And so Hayli was like, "Hey, let's just cut through the cemetery in the dark on our way back." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, sure." And so extremely creepy. There was no light. Again, we live in nowhere, so it was dark and shit. And so in order to get to her house from the cemetery, you need to cut through this wood path, where like we saw, that might have been a separate night, where we saw the dude who was just like standing over a paper bag that was clearly like a drug drop. But then like, there were deer and shit like rustling in the woods that I was like, oh god, it's bears, it's the hellhounds, like it's axe murderers, they're all coming for us. And like we got to the edge of this pitch black woods, and Haley's just cackling at how much of a weenie I am. And I'm like, we gotta take the long way around, let's go back, I don't want to go through the scary woods. She's like, neener, okay, fucking pussy. Yeah, so that's what our relationship is like.
Bravo. I do just want to say, to Haley's credit, of course, that like there is absolutely a way to combine the existential, kind of slow burn Lovecraftian horror with jump scares. And I just keep going back to Hereditary, and this is not a good reference point. This is not a good meeting point for us, because we have very differing opinions on it.
But I think it might get to the heart of the matter, though.
Yeah, and like that was, for the vast majority of it, a very slow burn, existential, like questioning yourself type of movie, which we'll come back to that in a second too. Like this whole conversation is just me saying, put a pin in that. We'll be back to that in a minute. Like, and then towards the end, there's a couple jump scares that I think are really effective. But like they're in their place. They're where they belong. And
like
so like
me.
Pardon?
Like me in the kitchen recording a podcast.
What?
They're in their place. They're where they belong. The
Oh man, Hayli calling us misogynists on our own podcast.
Oh no,
This is gonna be one of those episodes where it's like primo actual discussion content, and then the jokes are just bottom tier.
Oh, ooh.
We should have people vote. Who's worse at jokes, me or Sean?
But yeah, so like the other one that's kind of coming to my mind is, and I'm gonna be the one to do it this time, and I can't believe I'm about to do it. I'm gonna make an anime reference.
Hell yes!
Is Parasite, which is probably my all-time favorite anime, because that is very much, first and foremost, a creepy kind of existential paranoid anime, with like underlying body horror and stuff to it. And I think that blends really well. So like there's absolutely a place for all of this to kind of coalesce into something greater. I just think that Pet Sematary is not the place for that to happen. Because I feel like a lot of their kind of creepy unnervingness is punctuated with a jump scare that kind of, I'm like, okay, well, I was into the atmosphere there, but now that you've jump scared me, like the tension has been diffused. That's how this works. So it's a bummer.
I want to agree with you on one part of that. I think that
just one. The rest, go fuck yourself.
Well, yeah, but Zelda in the original, I don't like the body horror surrounding Zelda. Although I will say a lot of people said that's what they like most about the movie are the disturbing images regarding her sister.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about fucking Legend of. I'm like, who the hell was Zelda?
Did you not think like a character name's Cheat Sheet?
I don't think they ever mentioned Zelda by name in the new movie.
They did once or twice.
Okay.
I can see it being easy to miss if you weren't familiar with the source material, though.
Yeah, no, it totally blew right over my head.
She's not a princess, and in the original, she is acted by a man.
Well, of course she's not. She's the hero.
She.
You get the fuck out of here.
But I think it's actually poorly done in the original. I don't think it's not a representation of what that actual illness is like, which, bothers me anyway. But that body horror doesn't work for me as a viewer, and I think that it really detracts from the film. I think that body horror surrounding the sister and the jump scares, like you're saying, that scene with the sound of the dumbwaiter in the bathroom is great until they jump scare you with her falling.
Yes.
In the blood, when the blood is pouring out of it, it's a really nice conversation around PTSD, mental illness, and not being, her fear of approaching death. I think is to, they take all of that out of the movie by having those scenes with Zelda. And in fact, in the original, she also yells, Rachel, and it's just as cringy.
Okay.
She cackles like the Wicked Witch of the West in the original at one point, and it's really funny. I also want to second that, Sean, you had mentioned that there were a couple parts you found unintentionally funny. Even though I mostly liked the movie, the dumbwaiter was definitely one of those parts. Like her falling down the shaft. I stifled a bit of a chuckle at that moment.
I mean, I think the big thing is I'm not defending the body horror in this. I did not think the Zelda body horror was super engaging in any way. It just felt, I don't know, it kind of grimy and not in an enjoyable way.
I agree. I think that it was almost like it had a sense of ableism to it that I didn't love, and the original did too. And if we're gonna kind of talk about some things that are maybe not the shining moments of the movie,
haha, that's another Stephen King book.
I know. I tried. Vote for me.
It, the gunslinger. I can do it too. Vote for me.
The Windigo. What did you think about the Windigo? Because I will say that that's a Great Lakes region Algonquian folklore piece that's completely misrepresented in the film and plays a much bigger role in the book. And I'm not sure how I feel about how it plays a role in this movie. One thing that does scare people is legend, and I don't think it's played well in this film.
What was the Windigo? I'm sorry, the name, I remember it, but I don't remember what exactly it was.
It's the creature in the woods that you sort of see the hinted shadow of. And actually, in the 1989 film, they don't ever say the name of it, I don't believe. But in the 2019 film, Judd does tell Lewis about it.
Okay. I mean, I think, to me, I have kind of a weird relationship to Stephen King, in that the only thing of his that I have actually read is the Dark Tower series. And so when he mentioned that, my mind immediately went, oh, okay, it's just another one of those connective tissues to the Dark Tower. And I didn't really make any sort of association. I didn't even realize that it was an actual thing in any way. Are you guys familiar with the Dark Tower series at all?
Yeah, I haven't read it. I really want to. I've heard that, especially the first one's really great. But yeah, I mean, the thing about the Dark Tower that's interesting is that like the Dark Tower is kind of Stephen King Infinity War in a weird way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so like it's interesting that you have it's like watching the Avengers without having seen any of the solo movies, and I think that's that's an interesting experience to have in its own right.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. So like a lot of this stuff I just assume is some part of the Stephen King canon.
It's funny as someone who was a decently big Stephen King fan, that like those connections exist. Like even in the movie, it's just like a little Easter egg you can see on her when Rachel's stuck in traffic. You can see the sign like going to Derry. But like those connections exist, but they're not really important in the books themselves. Like they all stand alone fine. It's just the weird myth making that happens in the Dark Tower that I think is kind of neat. I think Stephen King, I guess like we kind of keep coming back to him, but I think as a writer, like I tend to feel like when he's good, he's real good, and when he's not, he's real not. But I think that's just a consequence of being so prolific and releasing like 3 books a year, and like being like, especially back in his heyday, like in the 80s, being high on coke for most of them. Like he doesn't even remember writing Cujo, and he said he was sad about it because he liked that book, and that sentiment really stuck with me. But yeah, like I've read some Stephen King books where I couldn't even finish them. It's like, this is more boring, like typical Stephen King stuff. And then I've read other books that I thought were really great. Like I really like Misery and Carrie and The Long Walk, and I thought those were, when he hits on a good idea that he can do justice. I think that he's got some really memorable stories. But there's a reason that it's the same couple of Stephen King stories that people keep talking about, as opposed to like From a Buick 8 or something, like one of them like millions of filler like car comes to life stories that he releases in between like his big like finger quotes, like not that I don't know if I'd say any of his are like a masterpiece, but like something like Misery is certainly a lot more respected and like well regarded than Under the Dome or something.
So before we wrap up, we've got some stuff that we want to talk about towards the end of the movie. I want to talk about the main death of the movie, which is Ellie. And of course, given my opinion of the movie, I'm kind of want to talk about more about why I felt it was a kind of weak death. The setup with the truck, church coming back, her going on the road, the fake out with Gage, all that stuff. Not really what my issue with the scene actually is. My issue with the scene is how much it wanted to do 2 things at once. And by that I mean it wanted to kill a kid, but it did not want to kill a kid. Because she gets quite literally trucked and is seemingly fine. Like, she's dead, but there's no gore or anything. She kind of like flies off slightly at a weird angle, which kind of made me chuckle because I'm like, how the fuck did she get in that patch of grass? But like, there's no blood. There's nothing to it. There's not even like, when you guys were talking about Gage's implied decapitation, like that's something I would have like at least liked the implication of, because like, it clearly wanted to show her dead, but it didn't want to show her dead. Like that's the type of thing that like if it had been an adult, they would have been way more gory, and we would have gotten some sort of gratification, I guess. From that sounds horrible, but bear with
We're
me.
beating a dead horse. We talk about the murder of children all the time.
I mean, yeah, but like, as it is, like, there's no blood in this scene. It's on the mom's hands, Rachel's hands, but that is it. And like, that is just incredibly bizarre to me. Like, it really felt like it undermined the gravitas of the scene. Like, I didn't necessarily need to see her splattered out and splayed across 4 counties, but like some sort of indication that she actually died and didn't just get kicked aside like Superman would have been great.
So I actually agree with you here, despite me liking kind of the switcheroo that the scene does. Because like, so thinking about it logically, right? Like that's a semi truck. Like the way that it's like she gets taken out by the, you know, like 18-wheeler gas tank. Like realistically speaking, that girl wouldn't just be dead. She'd be red misted. It'd be like if Saitama punched her.
There it
So you know what I am what I am. You know, but logically speaking, like obviously we need a body to bury, like we need a dead girl to come back.
Body
So
has
it's
been
weird
discovered.
bong 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 bong. Sorry. Anyway,
You'll
that's
get that next week.
Yeah, like it would make more sense to me if it was just like a regular car. Like it'd be more plausible to me that like it wouldn't, that you could still like keep the body like mostly in one piece, but still like dead, as opposed to the semi truck, which is like, I mean, man, if you get hit by a semi truck while you're in a car, like you're toast. Let alone like if you just like get taken out directly by the truck. So I do agree with you there, and I wasn't a huge fan of the way that the scene was shot with like I thought it was a little over dramatic the way that the like tank flew off and went in slow motion and like went slowly toward her. I get why they did it, to emphasize like, oh, you know, it's not Gage this time. Like there's still maybe this is a fake out, and you know, this scene's gonna come later. Like she'll get out of the way in time or something. But yeah, I was not a huge fan of the way the actual scene played out in this particular instance either.
I think that the 1989 film did this scene much better, and would have been even better if it was a silent film, as Jackson has said. Without the, you know, the no.
I just take out the Darth Vader.
But I just have to say, think of deer on the side of the road that are hit by the actual semi and not the tanker. And yeah, they have broken bones and everything, but they're usually not red misted. And I see that you guys want to see a mangled little girl, but but until you get an actual donated corpse and crash test that scene, I think that what was really the scene wasn't as powerful as the original. I'm glad they didn't have an extensive amount of gore there personally, because I think this is one of the moments where in the movie didn't want to be gore. It wanted to be psychological. What worked for me about this is that the blood they don't show the blood on her. We kind of have her blocked. Where we do see the blood is on that stuffed cat when you know, Rachel is cuddling with that toy and it's covered in her daughter's blood. So I thought that was really powerful.
I did like that detail, yeah. Like once the actual scene was done and like the emphasis of the stuffed toy, yeah, I agree.
With the implication that she's decided not to wash, you know, she had to have made that conscious choice to be, you know, embracing this bloody toy. You know, so that an implied process there.
Counterpoint to your it's not realistic for her to be red misted. We're watching a movie about children coming back to life after being put in the ground. I think like some level of gravitas is acceptable. And like I'm not necessarily even saying I need her to be red misted, but like just a little bit more impact, like just something would have been nice. Like you as I said, Gage being decapitated sounds like the perfect solution to this, because it's like we don't even necessarily need like a full visual of it, but like Hereditary did it well too, where like it happens and it's not gory and we don't get the gore until later, and like it's still impactful, and like that's what I just needed something. Some sort of more of an impact, even like, honest to God, even just like a thunk, I think would have worked really well. Like just a good sickening thunk of the hit. Like I think that's why Hereditary works so well, is because you do get that thunk, and like the power of audio is great. Like that's I think really what this boils down to, is it just needed Just like that extra little pinch of gravitas to it. That's all.
Getting that nice thunk. Also, I'm glad this conversation has centered around my use of the word red misted. I'm glad I can warp the discussion so twistedly to bring everyone down to my level. I'm like the Joker on this podcast.
You know, one thing that's not part of the 1989 film is the cat Winston Churchill, as his full name goes, is not in the original movie the mastermind behind that whole death. So that's new to the 2019.
Oh my god, I didn't even think about that. The cat is the mastermind.
Yeah, you put me in the woods, bitch, I'm gonna kill your kid. You know, that's what happened there.
I mean, I'm pretty sure the implication is, I don't know if I'm being like obtuse and dumb and unable to read the room, but I'm pretty sure the implication there is that like it's less the cat being pissed about being left in the woods and more like whatever dark force in the sour earth or whatever is like orchestrating these things to get bodies.
Don't ruin my headcanon, Jackson.
I'm here to ruin things. That's
the
what
cat
do.
looks like my cat, so I like have, you know.
The cat does look a lot like your cat. It was a little freaky, actually.
Listen, everything you say just becomes less and less surprising to me. Like that just yes, all right. Absolutely.
So I kind of wanted to point us to one scene in particular that I think is a nice microcosm of sort of the difference in perspective that approaching the movie with, you know, familiarity versus unfamiliarity the source material can give you. So Sean, I mean, you know what scene I'm talking about. Why don't you start us off and tell us why this scene did not work for you? The death of Judd. Well, to clarify.
Yeah. So it's not even necessarily so much the death of Judd as it is the setup to the death of Judd, which is really more a sign of everything I found wrong with the jump scares of the movie, in that Judd is now aware that Ellie is back alive. He is returning to his house to like go protect himself. He hears her moving around upstairs, or he thinks he does. He goes upstairs, he moves this bed, and like the tension builds to him moving this bed. You think something's going to happen, and then nothing happens. Then he goes downstairs and the thing happens. So like that's a pretty standard pacing for, you know, build tension, relieve tension, fake out jump scare type of thing. And like it's the type of thing that should work in theory, and under like the basic idea of film theory, it does work. My problem with the scene is that it goes back to that whole setup and payoff thing, because it when he moves this bed away, we get a clear shot of his ankle with a focus on his Achilles tendon, and previously we saw Ellie picking up this knife. And so, like, you immediately put the two and two together that she's going to stab him through there and just do gross stuff, which this whole scene actually did make me really squeamish just because, but what ends up happening is he doesn't get stabbed on the bed, and it's not until he is going downstairs that she does it to him, and it pays off in the exact way you think it is. So like the initial fake out doesn't work for me as a fake out because they do it anyway. Like so much of it has been clearly set up to happen, that when it doesn't, I'm like, okay, well, it's still gonna happen. And so when it does, I'm like, yeah, that's to be expected. Like if you're gonna do a setup and then a fake out, you gotta like change it up a little bit for me, and just kind of throw away what you have set up, because the expectation's already there, and for you to just deliver on that expectation doesn't work as a satisfying fake out. It just is a standard payoff at that point.
Now, what they did was exactly what you said they should do for you, is to sort of throw it all away and do something new. They just didn't do it within one movie. They did it across 2 movies and over 20 years. 30 years? I can't do math.
English majors, am I right?
Fellow gamers, these English majors and their math.
Says the communications major.
It's the same. So for me, okay, when we first see Judd's ankles, Judd has some significant ankles. Both are the actors for Judd.
That man's got some shapely ankles.
I didn't say they were shapely.
Listen,
I said
man.
they were significant.
Well, this is like fucking full on like Amish style porn at this point. Like there's just focus on those ankles.
Right? He bought those like high cut PJs. Those, what do they call them? Like
long underwear.
Bermuda shorts. He has it going on. So, as someone who's seen and appreciated the prior film, I was stoked for Jackson to see this part, and I could feel him next to me getting ready for what was supposed to happen. I was ready to have his expectations subverted, because I get off on watching other people like films I like. So,
no shame, I get it.
So, when we see Judd's significant ankles, people who know that this is the moment where his ankles get cut, and it's gnarly and creepy, and no one ever wants that to happen to them. And
it's an extremely memorable scene in the original. Just in case that isn't clear, like one of the things. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just to clarify, one of the things that I think works really well about the original is that, like, as Hayli has mentioned, it's more on like the psychological side, but when it goes for the gore, oh man, does it go for it. And so it's very judicious in how it uses
Y'all
gore,
just
and it
keep
makes scenes
selling
like
me
the
more on
ankle.
the original.
You should watch it. I mean, I think be ready for terrible acting, but other than that, I think it's worth a watch. So yeah, like the use of gore is very judicious, which makes these moments like there's no mistake. It's not just them like showing you the ankle because that's what they did in the original. Like this is very clearly purposeful. Anyone who has watched the original movie is going to remember that fucking Achilles tendon getting sliced open.
I mean, I'm going to remember it. I will say, I will give the movie props for that. Like, I'm kind of squirming in my chair a little bit here.
Back to what you were saying.
well,
Ellie.
and on the same lines, I think that they sort of ruin it after he falls down the stairs. They ruin it by bringing Norma back in, which is Judd's wife. That doesn't need to happen. They do the creepy mask thing. I think they sort of ruin it after that, but the tension is really there because everybody who knows that scene knows that in the original they show Judd's significant ankles, and they're memorable. So when you first see the movie, you think, why are we seeing so much ankle shot? And in fact, I watched this with people who had never seen the original the first time I watched the 2019 movie, and their reaction was, why do we keep seeing his ankles? Like, this is a weird shot. And I think they play it's even more unusual how much screen time the ankles get. So when he's standing around the bed, that's in the original where Gage is hiding. So another instance where our expectations are subverted, because he kicks the bed away, and that's the reveal that that's not where Gage is. And we remember as viewers of the movie, oh yeah, they're doing something different here. This isn't the same as the original. I guess they just tricked us with the ankles there. So you start to kind of come down from your excitement of seeing, the Achilles tendon severed. and you're excited that it's different, but you're also a little bit disappointed. But then, we get the cat sound, and Church is there. Church is the mastermind. He distracts Lewis, and Ellie severs that shit, and it's delicious.
Hell yeah.
Listen, I think the important thing that's coming out of this discussion is that we are blowing the lid off of this fucking cat, all right? This cat is like the true mastermind behind all this. Come at us, Stephen King.
Yeah.
Do we want to move on to the ending? Because this is kind of my big bone to pick with the movie, but I want to let you guys talk about this first.
I'm good.
Yeah, Jackson, you pick a bone.
No, you got to talk about it first. You're our guest.
I already talked.
You talk more.
Do you want me to just kind of go over what the differences are?
Yeah. Go ahead and give me your differences. Give me your take on it.
So, where the movie Pet Sematary 2019 falls short, I think, significantly. And this is why I'm not going to rate it higher than the original, even though the acting's better. And, you know, in 2019, people know how to record at night. And in 1989, they don't. So it's not very scary when they're walking through the back swamp and it's perfectly beautiful daylight and there's really bad CGI lightning.
Oh, there's still really bad CGI lightning. Don't worry.
Oh, it's better. I remember thinking it was a strict upgrade, but not quite there. Just a near miss.
It definitely, that's an area where the comparison definitely benefits the new film.
So the new film has a lot going for it. What's really missing is that in the original film, we already know that, you know, Gage is the one who dies initially. Ellie is away with grandparents. Judd has already died at this point. So it's pretty much similar, except for the kids are swapped, and there's a little bit of interesting tension there with having an older child to kind of come to terms with what it means to be dead in the world, and a father wondering if maybe I shouldn't have dug up my child. You know, maybe this was a bad idea. Maybe it's creepy to lay next to my dead kid. As she's clearly kind of torn away from childhood and can apparently communicate with the woods. So that's a little bit different there. But, you know, the stark differences are all have to do with Lewis's actions and his character arc, which is, I think, again, Sean, where I agree with you, that the character arcs are really lacking. Because he has to make a lot of decisions in the first movie. The first being to bury that cat, which, you know, most of that comes from Judd. The second decision is then to bury his child and expect that child to come back to life. Well, in the original film, it's not the case that Ellie, you know, kills mom and drags her up. You know, then they kill dad and drag him up, and then they go stand outside the car, right? It's not as horror movie tropey. It's actually much more interesting. And it has a lot more to say about how big of a lie we can tell ourselves about how we can control death in the situation and how we can make everything okay. Lewis has to lie to himself, and, you know, when his wife dies, actually. So, you know, Ellie kills Rachel in this one, and Lewis tells himself, you know, she hasn't been dead as long as Gage has been, because Gage, again, is the one who passes in the original. He convinces himself that she'll come back just fine. And in fact, in the 1989 film, we learn a little bit about Timmy Baderman, who dies in World War II, and his dad, who, you know, buries him, and he does not come back right.
Pardon me? What the fuck was that name?
that was a Stephen King
Timmy
name
Baderman.
is what that was.
And his father, Bill.
Okay.
So
a long time ago, I made a parody RuneScape account named Master Beto, and Timothy Baderman sounds like his son.
Oh, no.
Amazing.
Sorry, continue. I just needed to make sure I heard that right.
Yeah, that's the name. It's memorable. That's why I remember it. So, you know, we're missing a lot of deaths from the first one, including a suicide that, you know, happens in the first one. A lot of death. You know, Pascal, we have a lot of things that happen in both of them, but one of the really important ones that doesn't occur in the 2019 film, you know, surrounds Rachel. And that's because in the original, Lewis actually carries her up. And he makes that active decision to bring his wife back, even though he's already seen it fail multiple times. So it's sort of more of an exploration of mental illness and, you know, how much we refuse to relinquish control and accept the facts of death, even though he has been the one preaching throughout the whole movie that they need to be telling their children the truth about, or, you know, what he perceives to be the truth, which is very similar to what I perceive to be the truth about, you know, what happens when we die. So I think that's just so much more powerful in the original. And then, of course, you really need to watch the original, because there's the end scene just before it's implied that Lewis gets murdered by his wife. He makes out with her as her face oozes from her eye, and that gets in his mouth, and it's pretty awful.
That sounds miserable, but also like a way better ending than this trash that we got.
It's way better. This ending, this is where I stopped being on board with the changes the movie made. There's no thematic cohesion. Like, the decision to have Lewis bury his wife is just a crystal clear statement on, like, how grief consumes a person and how, like, it compounds itself, too. Like, it's not just that, it's, grief is a thing that happens once. It impacts all your decisions going forward, and when bad things continue to happen, you make decisions that are worse and worse. And so, like, that ending, like, is what sells the movie on its character arcs, and the new ending is just, like, insidious tier fucking trash.
Yeah,
So.
it, like, really is just kind of a payoff for the sake of nothing. Like, it's like, the standard end movie twist type of thing. Like, the immediate comparison is The Mist, where it ends with, like, a similar kind of, like, stinger that's, supposed to be like, ooh, here's the big, thing that leaves you unsettled. Whereas, like, The Mist, like, that's an end of a character arc. Like, that's a horrible thing that he has to live with now. And this is just kind of like, they're all zombies now. Oh, no!
We're gonna be a spooky ghoul family.
And I want to watch that movie.
Living with the Creeds. Lewis Creed. Stephen King, I mean, he grew up in the 50s, I guess. I guess Timothy Bader is not too far off. Oh, speaking of Stephen King, I want to say that I didn't want to interrupt Hayli while she was talking about important, serious themes and shit. But in the original movie, when there's that suicide, it's extremely jarring because in the scene immediately after that suicide, like, part of it is that they take Ellie to, like, the funeral and, like, have to try to explain all this shit to her. But, like, even though it's supposed to be a big dramatic moment, I can't take it seriously at all because this pastor, like, giving the eulogy is Stephen King.
Oh, no!
And he looks like he's having the time of his life.
Oh, no!
I cackled. It was great.
Also, speaking of things that make the movie harder to take serious, the lead in this just looks like Matthew Perry, which makes it really hard to watch, especially because his wife is named Rachel. So I kept, like, trying not to make Friends references.
For me, the blow was softened because Jason Clarke, I think his name is, he played Ted Kennedy in Chappaquiddick, and so I had seen a movie that wasn't this, and so I was able to disentangle the image of him being John Connor from Terminator Genesis in my mind.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing.
Well, what about when his kid comes back and he is British again? My little girl, or whatever happens there.
I am bad at picking up on people's accent slips. Like, I never notice them.
Sam gives me such a hard time for that because she's like, did you really not notice? And I'm like, no, did that happen?
Oh, okay, so it is you two, because I remember I was talking about Doctor Strange with you guys, and like, she was roasting the fuck out of Benedict Cumberbatch for his American accent, and I'm just sitting there thinking, like, I mean, I thought it was fine. Like,
it was, once it got pointed out, I caught it in Infinity War Part 1 a little bit more, but, like, no, I'm like, yeah, I was in the same boat. I'm like, yeah, that was fine. I didn't think it was that bad. What are you talking about? Sam's over here, I am American man, Stephen Strange.
Oh, lordy. Well, gang, do we have any closing statements on Pet Sematary?
I'm gonna be bold here and say, fuck this movie. The original sounds so much better. Why would you watch this?
I'm gonna say, watch the original movie and watch the new one right after.
I tend to agree. I tend to be on Team Hayli on this one. Sorry, Sean. I gotta side.
It's a 2-on-1. That's how this works.
She stacked the deck against you. The real mastermind was her cat. It was Church.
Oh, all right. I've been Sean McKinda. Find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. Find me on my website, isortof.com. Find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/helpus_skippy.
A very Jackson ending of you today. I'm Jackson Keller. You can't find me on Twitter anymore because fuck Twitter. But you can find me playing Smash Bros with my pal Connor at twitch.tv/Genghis_Con_. And I join Sean for Jackbox on Sundays a lot of the time. And I'll be joining him for his Danganronpa stream. Actually, that'll have already passed by the time this goes live, so never mind. Yeah, and you can also, if you want to get in touch with me, become a patron at patreon.com/BADHcast and join our patron exclusive Discord. What? Wah!
Hayli, I'm gonna offer this up to you once again. Do you have anything you want to say in closing? Like say something. Just say close yourself.
Thank you so much for letting me be part of a podcast that I listen to all the time and love. You can find me on Twitter at Hayli Mailey, but I don't do much there.
Oh, well, thank you for your support. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your support, and thank you for joining us for this lovely conversation about a movie that we wouldn't have talked about. I'm sure Sean hates you for it, for making him watch it. So
no, I adore these guest episodes. Like, I mentioned this when we had Maddie on and with Corey and stuff like that, because it forces us to watch movies that we wouldn't have otherwise watched. And, like, even if I don't like them, I think it's a really interesting conversation to have. So, like, genuinely thank you for making me watch this movie as much as I didn't like it.
I can recommend you very, very many bad movies.
I mean, let me tell you, I can do the same. Trust me. If you want something really enjoyable, go watch Love on a Leash. That's on Amazon Prime, and that's gonna be an hour to 2 hours that you won't get back.
You know, Jackson already made me watch Troll 2.
This is worse. I've seen Troll 2. This is worse. Because it has a dog that turns into a man and a woman falls in love with him. So
hell yeah.
It can't be as bad as Prodigy, which is not The Prodigy, which the movie video rental place tricked me into thinking was the movie that came out in 2019, but it was all a lie. And it was worse than Troll 2. It was worse than Troll 2's shit. It was the worst movie I've ever seen. I complained to Family Video, and they credited my accounts and called me when the new Prodigy movie was out.
Here's my metric. Did it have music?
It did. I think that it was the most stock music.
Well, we still haven't watched Birdemic. Don't say that now.
Okay. I'll wait. I'll hold off. Don't watch that movie. That's one that I will not recommend.
The only music Love on a Leash has is the main character singing as a dog, going, "I'm a dog, I'm a dog, I'm a dog."
That sounds
and
fucking
that's
incredible.
about it. There is literally no backing track.
Sean, when are we going to do the Super Mario Bros. Movie on this podcast? Everyone in the comments, shout us out. Tell us if we want the Super Mario Bros. Movie, because that movie's hilarious.
That movie's fucking great. So yeah, if you want to do that, you can do so by tweeting at BADHcast on Twitter. It's where we post like updates and polls and stuff like that. So you should go check that out. As Jackson said, we do have a Patreon at patreon.com/BADHcast. You can go help us stay ad free and get access to our Discord as well as bonus episodes and tell us what to play next and stuff like that.
And you get shout outs at the end of every single podcast if you join at the Stallion tier. So today, I would like to thank our current Stallions, Julia, Travis, and my dear mother, Autumn Keller.
Thank you guys so much. You guys are absolutely incredible. We really appreciate it. Also, thanks to Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're on Spotify, a bunch of other places as well. Go check them out. Support them in any way you can. They're a great band. And thanks to 25yearslatersite.com for hosting our nonsense. This is a good episode, but usual nonsense. You guys are great. There's a bunch of really talented, cool people doing a bunch of really talented, cool stuff over there, myself included. I'm hyping up my own articles. Go read my stuff. They're great.
Daddy.
Next week, we'll be... I'm sorry. I just got taken back by that. Next week, as we mentioned, we will be live on Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over at twitch.tv/helpus_skippy for a live recording of Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair. We will be doing like the usual episode before we break into a little Q&A. So if you've got questions for us, we've got answers for you. So come hang out and do that. We'll have the full episode up at the usual time, Thursday at noon. Other than that, Haley, anything you want to say in closing?
Thank you again. Yay.
Yay!
Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go